Imagine a world where war is not the worst thing that can happen to you. It is spring 1918, and the Great War has already drowned Europe in blood for 4 long years. Soldiers rot in the trenches, their bodies half buried in mud, their lungs choked with gas. Cities starve under blockades, their streets filled with the hollow-eyed and the hungry. Governments lie to their people, promising victory just around the corner, while the dead pile up in mass graves. But then something worse arrives. Something that doesn't fire bullets, doesn't drop bombs, doesn't announce its presence with the roar of artillery. It simply appears and begins to kill. This is not war. This is the Spanish flu. And it doesn't just kill. It erases people. It starts quietly, almost imperceptibly. In the trenches of France, a soldier wakes up with a headache and a sore throat. By noon, he's burning with fever. By nightfall, he's dead. His comrades barely have time to register his passing before they, too, begin to cough, violently, uncontrollably, until their lungs fill with blood and they drown in their own fluids. Doctors shrug and call it trench fever, just another misery of war. But this is different. This is faster. This is deadlier. Within days, entire regiments are incapacitated, their bodies racked with such violent symptoms that their skin turns a ghastly shade of blue as they gasp for air that never comes. By the time the world realizes what's happening, it's too late. The flu spreads like wildfire. In Philadelphia, a city that has just thrown a massive parade to celebrate the end of the war, the disease strikes with terrifying speed. Within days, the streets are lined with bodies. Hospitals overflow, their halls filled with the sounds of choking and the stench of death. Nurses, their faces masked with gauze, move from bed to bed, but there is nothing they can do. There are no treatments. No cures. Only the grim certainty that once the blue tint appears on a patient's lips, death is inevitable. The city runs out of coffins. Mass graves are dug in parks, the bodies buried without ceremony, without markers. The flu doesn't just kill, it erases people as if they had never existed. In the small towns of America's heartland, the flu hits like a sledgehammer. Families who had sent their sons off to war now watch as their daughters, their wives, their elderly parents succumb to the same invisible enemy. A mother in Kansas tucks her children into bed at night, only to find them stiff and cold by morning. A father in Iowa wakes to find his wife gasping for air, her face already turning that telltale blue. There are no funerals. No goodbyes. Just the quiet, horrifying realization that the war they had thought was over has followed them home in a far more insidious form. The governments of the world do what they always do in times of crisis. They lie. Newspapers, under pressure from officials who fear panic more than they fear the flu, downplay the severity of the outbreak. Just a cold, they call it. No need for alarm. But the bodies tell a different story. In London, the dead are piled in the streets, waiting for carts to take them away. In Berlin, the morgues are so overwhelmed that corpses are left to rot in the summer heat. In Spain, where the press is not censored, the headlines scream the truth. This is no ordinary flu. This is a plague. And it is killing faster than the war ever did. The flu doesn't discriminate. It strikes the young and the old, the rich and the poor. In some cases, it is almost mercifully quick. A man can feel fine in the morning and be dead by nightfall. In others, it lingers, turning the body into a battleground where the virus fights against the last remnants of the immune system. Those who survive often wish they hadn't. The flu leaves scars, physical and psychological. Lungs damaged beyond repair. Nerves shattered by the trauma of watching loved ones die. A generation marked by loss, by the knowledge that the world they had known was gone forever. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the flu begins to fade. By the summer of 1919, the worst is over. The bodies are buried. The streets are cleaned. The world tries to move on. But the Spanish flu had changed everything. It had killed more people in a single year than the Black Death had in a century. It had exposed the fragility of modern medicine, the incompetence of governments, and the brutal indifference of a disease that didn't care about borders or bullets or bravery. In the end, the flu killed somewhere between 50 and 100 million people, more than the total number of military and civilian deaths in World War I. And yet, almost as soon as it was over, the world forgot. The flu became a footnote in history, a dark parenthesis between the horrors of the war and the optimism of the Roaring Twenties. But for those who lived through it, the memory never faded. They carried it with them, in the way they flinched at the sound of a cough, in the way they clutched their children a little tighter, in the way they looked at the world and knew, deep down, that it could all happen again. Because the Spanish flu didn't just teach the world about death. It taught the world about fear, about helplessness, about the terrifying reality that no matter how advanced we think we are always just one mutation away from annihilation. And a century later, as the world faced another pandemic, those lessons would come rushing back, reminding us that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does echo. The brutal truth no one wants to admit: the Spanish flu didn't just kill. It exposed the cracks in society. The rich fled to their country estates, leaving the poor to die in the slums. Governments prioritized the war effort over public health, letting the virus spread unchecked. Doctors, armed with little more than leeches and aspirin, were powerless against a virus that mutated faster than they could understand it. And the survivors? They were left with a world that had been forever changed, a world where trust in institutions had been shattered, where the line between life and death had never been thinner. In some places, the flu killed so fast that bodies were left to rot where they fell. In others, the dead were stacked like cordwood in mass graves, buried without names, without markers, without the dignity of a proper farewell. The flu didn't just take lives. It took humanity. And yet, even in the face of such horror, there were moments of resilience. Nurses who worked until they collapsed. Doctors who stayed when others fled. Families who cared for each other, even as they coughed blood into handkerchiefs. These were the people who kept the world from falling apart completely. These were the people who reminded us that even in the darkest times, there is still hope. But the Spanish flu also left behind a warning that the world ignored for a century. A warning that pandemics don't just disappear, that they can return, stronger and deadlier than before, that the only thing standing between us and the next great plague is luck. And luck, as history has shown, is a fragile thing. The question that haunts us still: could it happen again? The Spanish flu was a wake-up call, a brutal, bloody reminder that humanity is never as safe as it thinks it is. And yet, a century later, the world found itself facing another pandemic, another invisible enemy, another wave of death and fear. The lessons of 1918 were forgotten. The warnings were ignored. And history, as it always does, repeated itself. But this time, we have a choice. This time, we can remember. This time, we can learn. Because the Spanish flu wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. And the next pandemic might not give us a second chance.